I just watched the ABC News interview with Joe Biden. Well, the best way I can explain it is it felt to me like a lot to me like debate night Biden with some sleep. So Joe Biden on debate night seemed like you start with baseline Joe Biden with similar cognitive issues to Donald Trump, minus he doesn't have the showmanship of Donald Trump, so his cognitive issues show up more. Plus a lot of stress, lack of sleep potentially, and that's just a formula for disaster. Here, you still have Biden with the cognitive issues, with his lack of showmanship, but at least he has a decent amount of sleep. But it did not in any way to me show that Joe Biden's actually okay and he just had a bad night. He certainly had a bad night in terms of the way he was at that night that's not the state of Joe Biden. That is how he was at that time. And again, I think it was sleep and stress and who knows what else he's got going on. I mean, at that age and suffering from cognitive issues, it doesn't take much for a collapse like what we saw during the debate. But the interview really didn't reassure me in any way at all whatsoever. I'd actually thought he would do better. That being said, some highlights from the interview. He does that same skipping, like scratch record thing that Donald Trump does all the time, that right-wingers won't recognize or admit to, and also the Young Turks won't recognize or admit to, right? But they definitely do the same thing, and I saw him do a lot of that in the interview. So it's kind of like he's starting to say one thing, and then he skips to another sentence. If you were to write what he said, you would have long run-on sentences, lack of periods. I mean, it's just kind of all over the place. He is defiant as far as he refuses to take a cognitive test, which that's either arrogance or he doesn't have faith in himself either, because being able to pass a cognitive test would be a big boost for him right now. It would reassure a lot of people that want to believe in him because of the alternative. But, he kept, Stephanopoulos really did a good job. Again, independent media, you're supposed to be talking about how mainstream media is garbage, whatever. ABC, by the way, is one of the best mainstream media, right? But a lot of garbage in mainstream media. ABC News certainly has a lot of issues, but they're certainly far better than CNN or MSNBC, which is why you hardly hear anybody talking about them. They just say mainstream media generally when they're talking pejoratively, and then when they're talking specifically, it's always CNN or MSNBC because they're the worst, right? They focus the most on the entertainment factor. ABC News is more serious, and this is a perfect example of that because Stephanopoulos is a liberal news network, and he pushed Biden hard. Biden kept trying to slip around and escape, and he just kept hitting the man because he was asked about the cognitive test. And Biden starts talking about, he has a cognitive test every day. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would they be giving him a cognitive test every day? Is that really a thing? And then he jumps to like, oh, I have a physical. But he's asking about cognitive tests. So why are you talking about physicals? And I go to Walter Reed and blah, 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 blah. And then he's like stopping in the middle of his sentence and doing like, this is like 5 minutes into the interview, by the way. And then he will not drop out of the race no matter what. And, I can't even say his name. I'm going to stumble on his name. I'm just going to say the host from now on. You know who did the interview? Stephanopoulos. I'm not going to say his name. But he kept pushing him. He's like, listen, first of all, he kept pushing him on the data. Look how bad the polls are. Well, they doubted me, and look, 2020, and I won. I beat him. Yeah, but you barely beat him that time. And now your polls are significantly lower than there. So it's like he's completely acting like Donald Trump in that way, where he's completely defying reality, right? So he's just simply saying that he has the ability to win, making a very weak argument of, I won the last time. But then when he's given the very valid point of, you won the last time, but you barely won, and now things are much worse than they were for you. He doesn't have an answer for that. He just keeps saying, I'm going to win, don't trust the polls. Like, bro, that's not how reality works, right? It's like, I'm trying to get into Harvard. I've never been an A student or even a B student, right? And then I take the SAT, and I get a pretty low score, right? And then people are like, how are you going to get into Harvard? I'm like, I'm going to get in, trust me. I know what I'm capable of. And they're like, but listen, you barely graduated from high school. And like, yeah, but I graduated though, right? I graduated. People thought I wouldn't graduate, and I graduated, right? And they're like, yeah, but you barely graduated. If you barely graduated from high school, and then your SAT score was so low, how on earth you can get into Harvard? I'm gonna get into Harvard. Just watch me. Just watch me. Don't, people making assessments, and they got polls, and people predicting, and everybody trying to tell you what you can do, but I know what I can do, and I'm gonna do it. Like that was basically how he was responding. He just completely ignores any data that's contrary to his idea of that he's gonna win. First of all, he didn't have a basis for why he's gonna win. I mean, if you ask him, he'd say, no, well, I have a basis. I won the last time. But that's not a basis for how you're gonna win now. Barely winning the last time is not a basis for winning now when things are much worse for you than they were the last time. Like, every basic logic tells you that if you scrape through the last time and things are much worse for you than then you're absolutely going to lose, right? And if you're going to disagree with me, you have to come up with some kind of an argument or basis for why you think I'm wrong. But he didn't. He didn't come up with any kind of response or argument to why he thinks he's going to win. It was almost juvenile. It's just like, I'm going to win. I'm getting into Harvard. Like, bro, you're not getting into Harvard, but look at your SAT scores. Look at your track record in high school. Like, by what magic are you going to get into Harvard? By what magic is Biden going to be able to win? He's got nothing. Just like, I'm going to win. Just watch me. He didn't seem very sharp either. In trying to prove himself one time, because he played a game, he said, I got a cognitive test every day. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Then it sounds like what he meant was just being president is a cognitive test, right? Because he has a lot of duties to do. So being that he's doing his job, that's his cognitive test. So a little word game thing, right? But in him trying to prove himself one time, he said something like, look at all the things that I did today. And today, I did a phone call. I was on with the prime minister. And then he stops himself like, oh, well, I probably shouldn't get into details. Like, to me, that is showing me the same thing that I saw during the debate, right? He's not sharp enough to not even start going down that road, right? He just jumps into talking about a phone call that he had with Netanyahu apparently today. And in the middle of that, his brain is like, some of that stuff is confidential or blah, blah, blah. I got to watch what I'm saying, right? To me, him in a sharper state, and I when I say sharper state, it might only be a year ago or 2 years ago. He wouldn't even have gone down that road in the beginning to be stuck in the middle and then switching. I don't know, man. He confirms what I said in my video today. Online people are playing games and talking about he's going to drop out. But he ain't dropping out. Are people going to try to make him drop out? Possibly. Things are looking very bad, but he's not dropping out. And I think the real decision makers are going to stick by him unless they can come up with some kind of magic to where a magic alternative, right? Because everyone else is trailing him. All the alternatives trail Joe Biden. So unless they can somehow formulate an alternative that doesn't trail Biden ain't going anywhere. He's definitely not going anywhere in terms of his decision making. And I don't think the powers that be, whoever the people are that would push him to drop out, I don't think they're going to do so because they don't have any better options. I mean, it's embarrassing that that's the case, but that's the case. Beyond that, I think he said, he kept pushing him on. What if they ask him to drop out? What if Pelosi sits him down and ask him to drop out? What would you do? Well, that's not going to happen. Okay, but what would you do if it happens? Listen, I can do this, blah, 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 blah. No one's doing that. I'm staying in the race, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but are you saying that's a no? You're not going to drop out even if they tell you? I'm not going to answer that question. I mean, props to him on saying that. I don't know if Trump would ever do something like that. I mean, to me, I never want to call Biden an alpha, but let's call it more alpha. It's more alpha to, if you don't want to answer a question, just to straight up say it, rather than to keep playing games and bouncing around. He did that a little bit in the beginning, but when he kept pressing him, he was just like, listen, I'm not going to answer that question. I don't know, guys. The interview did not go very well in my view. Again, I feel like that was the same Biden that we saw in the debate. The only difference is that he got more sleep. So, So that means it was significantly better, right? But again, I believe it was stress and lack of sleep, his health or whatever, why he did so bad on that night. I mean, he's starting with a baseline of a very old guy who has cognitive issues, in my view. Then combine that with the stress and whatever, and he had a collapse, right? But I don't feel like it was... It's hard to illustrate. I don't feel like it's night and day. I mean, he didn't have a collapse in this interview, so I guess in that sense it's not night and day, but it's not like... I don't know, man. This situation is so crazy that I'm having trouble articulating. I'll keep it to the basics. Interview did not go well. I don't think anyone's going to be reassured by the interview. And the fact that they know what the stakes are, and this is the best they could come up with. I'll tell you what, people that are saying Biden needs to go out there and reassure people and do stuff, it ain't happening, man. I think the only thing we can get out of Joe Biden right now that'll give any positive energy is I think he still has it in him to do, like a shouting, energetic teleprompter thing. Right? But Joe Biden live, I think that's over, man. I mean, he's probably still under a lot of stress, so I guess we could put that in mind. But when is the stress going to be any lower than it is now? From now until the race, he's going to have the stress of losing and the chaos that's about to happen and everything. Plus the same cognitive issues that aren't going to be getting better, that are probably going to be deteriorating. So I think it's a wrap, man. At this point, I don't think we're ever going to see a Biden that is in any way impressive live. Biden being impressive live to any degree is over. Again, teleprompter Biden, I think he still has that in him. That's not going to be consistent, I don't think, but he's still capable of that. So in the right moment, planned right time of day, lots of sleep, caffeine, whatever, he can get on there and the American people, a woman's body is her body, and we're not going. He could still do a little something, and I'm sure there's a ton of gullible people who will give that more credit than they should, because he is reading from a teleprompter. So that's not really demonstrating anything that is all that valuable as far as a president. Because as a president, your big thing is decision making. I mean, your presentation skills are valuable too, but ultimately your decision making skills. Biden ain't going anywhere, but Biden's gone. He ain't going anywhere, but he's gone already. And I don't think he's coming back. Sorry to say. How would Donald Trump do under similar stress? I don't know if we'll ever find out. Unless, of course, he... I was going to say if he loses the election. Even if he loses the election, I still don't think he's going to be stressed out like Biden is right now, because he's going to continue to play his game in the court and all this kind of stuff. And he's just not used to being held accountable. So I just don't see him being too worried about that. There'll be some level of stress, but it's not going to be like what Biden's going through right now. And it's going to be going through until the election. Especially, forget about him being a president and the election. A man his age suffering from some level of dementia, in my view, as the son of a father who is suffering from dementia. My father has dementia. They get very, very frustrated when they feel themselves losing themselves, and they feel useless, and they don't have a value. They can't. No one's really looking to them for advice or whatever. They need people to hold their hand and whatever. That stuff is frustrating, man. So with all this talk about Joe Biden's cognitive abilities, he could very, very easily just get stuck in this negative loop, anxiety, frustration, irrational behavior, and then the stress itself can agitate the dementia to make it even worse. I just wish I had something better to tell you guys, but it is what it is, guys.